From the government's new strategy on tackling violence against women and girls to the borrowing and financial talk with this week, and the new ambassador to the USA, this episode of the Roundup, the last one of the year, is the place to be for clear explanation of the biggest political news and in-depth, balanced analysis. As we go through, if you want to read this instead, or you want to check my sources, you can do that on my website, newsoftheweek.net. So maybe you've heard this week about the misogyny lessons for boys, or the specialist offences for SA and other measures like that. You would have heard of that because the government has published their Violence Against Women and Girls strategy this week, or the VAWG strategy. The government has said there is a moral mission for the whole of society to end violence against women and girls. Their approach focuses on addressing the root causes, prevention, and supporting victims while relentlessly pursuing perpetrators. The government said it is pervasive in all parts of the country: homes, schools, workplaces, the streets, clubs, and local communities. And to be fair, the figures make that clear. 1 in 8 women in England and Wales experienced domestic abuse, sexual assault, or stalking. There were 200 rapes every day in the year to June, and more than 150 women are killed every year. And I'll just say, I never would have guessed the figures were that high. Whether it's through this or something else, that's staggering and it obviously needs solving. So we'll go into how the government think they're going to solve that. But those figures aren't helped by 39% of 13 to 17-year-olds in teenage relationships in the last year involving emotional or physical abuse. The government strategy revolves around 3 areas. But the first is an early intervention to stop violence before it starts, they say. But how will the government do this? Well, they'll give teachers, parents, and caregivers the tools to have conversations with children about healthy relationships. There will also be a helpline for teenagers concerned about their action or their partner's action to call and speak to somebody. Also, in the document they've published, it said they will push back against violent porn, and they will do this by overhauling relationships. RSHE education, which is relationships, sex, and health education. It will also take action in universities and workplaces, and there will be community-driven things like sports initiatives and other stuff too, to try and, take away the focus of kids being alone in their room or being in spaces where that could be allowed. On the family side of things, it seems there will be advice and support available to families that are struggling or have struggled with domestic abuse in the past, where it's an intergenerational thing, for example. There'll be tailored support for children and victims, and these will include things like start family hubs in disadvantaged areas. In terms of the pursuit of perpetrators, the second part of the government strategy, well, they say it's relentless pursuit of perpetrators, and to be fair, the government called the policing response currently inconsistent, and the charge rates shamefully low. To change that, they will put in police powers to tackle violence on the same level as the powers they give to tackling terrorists or organised crime. And there will be further use of technology, and criminal courts will be transformed to instill confidence and speed up the times to prosecution. It's also been said that abolishing police and crime commissioners will help in ending the postcode lottery over the quality of policing, and there'll be specialised teams in terms of rape teams in police forces delivering what the government calls a specialist-led response. In terms of victim support, the government has said it is essential to break the cycle, but the support services currently aren't consistent and joined up enough. They said every victim and survivor must have tailored support and access to holistic support, with a system being built that will be accessible, coordinated, and compassionate. Aside from this, there will be £550 million in support services over the next 3 years, along with an extra £5 million from the Department and Social Care every year. The document for this was 91 pages long, so to treat all of these changes like a bit of an overview. Anyway, how's this been received? Well, the Domestic Abuse Commissioner for England and Wales, Dame Nicole Jacobs, who said the commitments do not go far enough. She did say it rightly recognises the challenges, but also that the investment for this wasn't there. The CEO of Refuge said a similar thing. Refuge is the largest specialist domestic abuse charity, and that said, it holds real potential, but that it would only be realised if the strategy that the government has put forward had sustained leadership and robust accountability and addressed chronic underfunding. So it's clear then that there is some issues with the investment part of this. But that concludes the news I got on policy change. On foreign policy, The Times noted that Christian Turner has been chosen to replace Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the USA. Obviously, Mandelson was sacked due to his links, those were strong links to Jeffrey Epstein, the paedophile. This was a while ago now, and there was uproar and speculation at the time that vetting procedures for Mandelson's appointment weren't properly followed. There were several replacements being talked about, with some having experience as ambassador before Mandelson. There were thoughts that reinstating a previous holder of the role would be a political misfire to the government, and that might be why we've not seen that. Also, lots to talk about the politicisation of the ambassadorship and how that was going to be discouraged by people within the government, like civil servants and things. So the appointment then went to Christian Turner, who is a career diplomat. He worked at the UN in May, and he's previously served as commissioner to Pakistan and previously worked in the British Embassy in Washington in Tony Blair's government. In general politics, with the big news out of policy and foreign affairs, where we're talking about comments, speculation, and in general goings on. The Guardian reported that the BBC has vowed to fight Trump's $10 billion lawsuit, claiming it should be dismissed. A 33-page lawsuit was filed in Florida on Monday, with Trump accusing the BBC of defamatory, deceptive, disparaging, inflammatory, and malicious depiction of him. He said it cost him his reputation and his revenue. Now, the BBC has said it would defend itself over the suit, and it said it didn't have the rights to air the programme in the USA, so the case should be dismissed on the basis that they aren't at fault for reputational damage in the USA. There are other factors as well, like the financial and reputational damages being dismissed by the BBC, who said because he won the election, he couldn't have suffered from that financial and reputational damage. But it's already been a bit of a headache for the BBC. They're already searching for a new Director General, and there are concerns over how it will be funded in the future, with loads and loads of uproar and speculation about the N2 licensing fees. There is no question, though, that the clip the BBC used was from two parts of the same speech that was almost over an hour apart. And that's something the BBC's apologised for, so there's no getting away from that. But I want to know what you think about the lawsuit and how that should go, whether it should be dismissed, and who you think is in the wrong. Let me know in the comments. Coming back over to this side of the Atlantic, though, the BBC detailed that an asylum hotel firm has handed back profits of almost £14 million amid anger over the service. Mears, which I think I'm pronouncing right, is reportedly one of the biggest accommodation providers, and they've had to return £13.8 million to the Home Office, and that's due to contractual obligations. And the profit for these things is capped at 6%, but in some areas of the UK, like Northern Ireland, it peaked at a 17% profit. So that's where it's had to hand things back. Now, the article noted that there have been concerns that these profits, which are in excess of the contract, have come at the cost of care, with people in the article claiming there were poor standards, dirty conditions with mould, unclean conditions with rubbish, and unfit conditions where disabled people weren't properly cared for or not enough food was made available. The accommodation provider said its accommodation was regularly inspected by the Home Office, and that it works to ensure disabled children are properly cared for as well. Sticking with the BBC, as I know they've been a feature in this category the entire way through, they noted the Electoral Commission has raised concerns about the prospect of more delays to local council elections. Now, the government has a new plan for local government. I say new, it's new with their government. It's about a year old now. And you might know it because last year many local council elections were postponed in order for them to be abolished and replaced with unitary authorities. These will combine the two-tier councils and cover a larger geographic area and as well a population, but they will effectively streamline services. To implement this, the government has responded to requests from councils again this year to postpone elections again. Now, they've said they will accept more delays until next year, but as a majority of councils asking for postponement are run by Labour, there is criticism of them basically avoiding the vote and avoiding accountability. The same criticisms have been levelled against the Tories as well. The Electoral Commission is basically saying that not having these elections can damage confidence and legitimacy. It does not agree that the use of resources and the so-called capacity restraints that councils are putting on themselves are legitimate reasons to cancel or postpone the elections. Anyway, in news on stats and trends, I've got some financial news for you, but don't worry, it won't be too dense. The Times reported that the UK borrowing has risen to the second highest level ever. It has risen to billion between April and November, which is an increase on last year by £10 billion. The Times noted it's the second highest amount ever recorded, with the highest coming during the COVID pandemic. On a monthly basis, November was actually just under November last year, with experts attributing that to tax rises, and of course, both of Rachel Reeves' budgets have increased taxes. As we know though, borrowing is 2.993 trillion and it sits at around 95% of GDP, with interest payments taking up one in every £10 the government spends, which is roughly £111 billion every year. That's bad, right? Because that's a lot of money that can be spent on public services or on investment, which is instead being sucked up by borrowing. It's doing nothing for the economy. Now, what's the increased borrowing come from? Considering the government keeps talking about it, reducing it, and being financially responsible, is it a failure on their part? Well, plainly and simply, it's through spending. Things like reversing the two-child benefit cap, the winter fuel payments, and all of that have all costed money up front, which has been paid for by borrowing. Also, where money could have been saved by the government through things like welfare reform, they had to U-turn, so they haven't saved money. There's also questions as to whether growth would be enough to offset this by making the extent of borrowing less severe and giving more opportunity for tax receipts. Basically, there's lackluster growth at the moment as well. Will it get worse or better? Well, it's hard to say. On a surface level, governments generally have bad borrowing records, especially in the last few years. But then there's a series of international issues compounding those problems, which haven't helped either. I'm thinking things like the financial crash, then COVID, then the war in Ukraine being good examples of those. Anyway, this government specifically seems to be prone to spending a lot more money from a relatively weak position. And I mean that the government took a stance on the two-child benefit cap and the winter fuel payments and have now went back on both. That doesn't bode well, especially when the government is unpopular and isn't thought to be in a very good place for the public. What I mean is they could be pressured into making more decisions with very, very short-term implications. Now, on their side on this, though, is that most of their big wins for growth will not return yet. There are arguments about housing, Heathrow, green energy, Scunthorpe steel furnaces, and all of that they were never going to have immediate payoffs. So we might see growth continue throughout the Labour government's power. But they're also trying for efficiency, through productivity, and if they get that right, that would be good for growth as well. It would mean the economy is producing more out of nothing, and that's especially there's a lot of potential there because of how bad productivity in this country is comparatively to other countries. But that's also been a problem area, so that's not a given thing. Anyway, staying on the theme, the Mirror noted that the Bank of England has cut interest rates from 4% to 3.75%, and they called it an early Christmas present. So yes, the Bank of England has cut interest rates by 0.25%. It's the sixth cut since last year, and this drop has been expected since inflation has also cooled off. What does it mean for you? If you borrow for a mortgage, then the interest you pay might decrease. But you might have seen if you save money, the interest rate you are given on your savings might also be less. Now, interest rates can affect the confidence of investors. Low interest rates make borrowing in general cheaper, and it kind of incentivizes investment, whereas higher interest rates tend to scare people off of investing, taking out more borrowing. So it is a good thing, but also there's supposedly going to be a lot more caution in the future because we're getting lower than it has been for a few years now. Anyway, that's the news I got this week. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for your support this year. This episode is the last one this year, and I'll be back in 2026 for more episodes of The Roundup. Stay tuned on News of the Week and my socials. Appreciate everyone watching a lot, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please remember to like and subscribe because it helps me out massively. I'll be back next year. I'm going to take a week off now, and I hope you have a good Christmas. Merry Christmas from me at News of the Week, and a Happy New Year. Bye.